In today's episode, we're diving into 5 stories where animals took revenge on hunters. From a wealthy oil executive who underestimated a wounded lion in South Africa, to an unemployed mechanic whose illegal grizzly bear hunt turned deadly when his rifle misfired. But first, let's begin with the first story, where one man's arrogance in the African bush cost him everything. It was August 14, 2015, and the sun hung heavy over the rolling hills of Limpopo Province, South Africa. The air shimmered with heat waves rising from the red earth, and acacia trees dotted the landscape like ancient sentinels. This was big game country, where the line between hunter and hunted can shift in a heartbeat, and where respect for the wild wasn't just tradition, it was survival. Derek Matheson had flown in from Houston 3 days earlier, his custom rifle case and expensive gear marking him as another wealthy American seeking the ultimate trophy. At 42, Derek was an oil executive who had built his fortune on calculated risks and unwavering confidence. Back home in Texas, he was known for his weekend hunting trips, white-tailed deer, elk, the occasional wild boar. His trophy room was filled with mounted heads and framed photos of successful hunts. But Africa was different. Africa was where real hunters proved themselves. Derek had specifically requested a solo hunt. Group expeditions were for amateurs, he told the outfitter. He wanted to test his skills against dangerous game without the safety net of other hunters or the embarrassment of needing help. His professional hunting guide, the seasoned local named Thabo, had tried to discourage the solo approach, explaining that wounded, dangerous game required teamwork and backup. But Derek's money talked louder than Thabo's experience. The hunting concession sprawled across thousands of acres of pristine bushveld, home to the Big Five and countless other species. Lions in this region were particularly large and aggressive, having learned to avoid humans while maintaining their natural hunting instincts. The terrain was deceptive, open grassland that suddenly gave way to thick brush and rocky outcroppings, where a wounded animal could easily turn the tables on an overconfident hunter. African lions are apex predators weighing up to 420 pounds. Capable of reaching speeds of 50 miles per hour in short bursts. A male lion's bite force exceeds 650 pounds per square inch, strong enough to crush bone. When wounded, they become exponentially more dangerous, using their intelligence and remaining strength for one final devastating attack. They're known to circle back and ambush their pursuers, turning the hunt into a deadly game of cat and mouse. The morning had started well. Derek and Thabo had tracked a magnificent male lion to a clearing near a dried riverbed. The animal was massive, easily 400 pounds, with a full dark mane that marked him as a dominant male in his prime. Derek took his time, setting up the shot from 150 yards away. His first bullet struck the lion in the shoulder, a solid hit that should have been fatal. The lion roared, stumbled, and disappeared into a thicket of wait-a-bit thorns and dense brush. Thabo immediately called for patience. Standard protocol demanded waiting at least 30 minutes for a wounded, dangerous animal to weaken and die. But Derek was impatient. He'd made a good shot, he insisted. The lion was probably already dead. Against Thabo's strong protests, Derek grabbed his rifle and headed toward the thicket alone, determined to claim his trophy quickly. The brush was thick and visibility was limited to just a few yards in any direction. Derek pushed through the thorns, following drops of blood on the ground and broken branches where the lion had passed. He was focused entirely on the trail ahead, his rifle ready, confidence building with each step. What he didn't realize was that the wounded lion had used its last reserves of strength not to flee, but to circle back. The attack came from behind with explosive force. The lion had been lying in wait, using the thick cover to mask its position. Derek heard a low growl just as 400 pounds of wounded fury slammed into his back, driving him face first into the thorny ground. The lion's claws raked across his shoulders and neck as massive jaws clamped down on the back of his skull. Derek's rifle flew from his hands as he was driven into the dirt. The lion's bite crushed through bone and into brain tissue with devastating force. Derek's body convulsed once, then went limp. The lion held its grip for several more seconds before releasing him and staggering backward, blood from its own wound mixing with Derek's in the dust. The wounded lion managed only a few more steps before collapsing. Derek's bullet had done its job. The animal's lungs were punctured and it was bleeding internally. But it had used its final moments to exact a terrible price from the hunter who had pursued it so recklessly. Thabo found both bodies 20 minutes later. Derek lay motionless in the thorns, his skull crushed and his neck nearly severed by the lion's powerful jaws. The lion had died just yards away, its magnificent mane now matted with blood. The guide immediately radioed for help, but there was nothing anyone could do. An investigation by local authorities ruled the death accidental but preventable. Derek had violated basic hunting safety protocols by pursuing wounded, dangerous game alone. The hunting outfitter faced no charges but quietly updated their policies to require guides to physically restrain clients who attempted similar reckless behavior. Derek's body was flown back to Houston, where his funeral drew hundreds of mourners who remembered him as a successful businessman and devoted father, not as the overconfident hunter who had fatally underestimated his prey. Derek learned too late that in Africa, the animals don't care about your money or your reputation. For Carl Morrison, it wasn't arrogance that led him into danger, it was desperation and greed that put him face to face with a grizzly bear defending its winter den. It was November 3rd, 2016, and winter was closing in on Yellowstone National Park. Snow dusted the high peaks while frost painted the meadows silver each morning. The park's famous geysers sent steam columns into the crisp air, and most wildlife was preparing for the harsh months ahead. It was a time when the wilderness felt especially wild, when even experienced outdoorsmen knew to tread carefully. Carl Bulldog Morrison had earned his nickname through years of stubborn persistence and a stocky build that made him look like he could bulldoze through any obstacle. At 51, he was an unemployed mechanic from Billings, Montana, whose luck had run out along with his savings. A series of bad decisions and worse investments had left him desperate for money, and he knew the black market value of bear parts could solve his immediate problems. Carl had been poaching illegally in protected areas for months, using his childhood knowledge of Yellowstone's backcountry to avoid rangers and tourists. He preferred working alone. Fewer witnesses, no one to split profits with, and no one to question his increasingly risky decisions. His modified hunting rifle was unregistered, his camping gear was minimal, and his respect for park boundaries was non-existent. Grizzly bears in Yellowstone can weigh over 600 pounds and stand 8 feet tall on their hind legs. As winter approaches, they become increasingly aggressive about defending food sources and den sites. A grizzly's bite force exceeds 1,200 pounds per square inch, and their claws can grow up to 4 inches long. When protecting their winter territory, they will attack with devastating ferocity, viewing any intruder as a direct threat to their survival. Carl's morning had been successful. He'd managed to kill a smaller black bear near a berry patch, field dressing it quickly and hiding the valuable parts in his backpack. But success bred greed, and Carl decided to push his luck further. He'd been tracking a massive grizzly for over an hour, following claw marks on trees and massive paw prints in the soft earth. The grizzly's den was located in a natural cave beneath a rocky overhang, surrounded by thick brush and fallen logs. Carl approached carefully, his rifle ready, thinking he could catch the bear sleeping or at least off guard. What he didn't realize was that grizzlies are light sleepers, especially when strangers approach their winter sanctuary. The bear detected Carl's scent long before the poacher saw him. As Carl crept through the underbrush, trying to get a clear shot at the den entrance, the grizzly was already moving. The massive animal emerged from the cave with surprising speed and silence. positioning itself between the intruder and its winter home. Carl finally spotted the bear when it was less than 30 yards away. He raised his rifle quickly, but the illegal weapon, poorly maintained and modified with cheap parts, misfired. The firing pin struck the primer, but the cartridge failed to ignite. Carl frantically worked the bolt, trying to chamber another round, but the grizzly was already charging. 600 pounds of muscle and fury covered the distance in seconds. The bear's first swipe knocked Carl's rifle from his hand and sent him sprawling backward into the brush. Massive claws raked across his chest, tearing through his jacket and into flesh. Carl screamed and tried to roll away, but the grizzly was on him instantly. The bear's jaws clamped down on Carl's shoulder, crushing bone and muscle with devastating force. Carl's arm went numb as tendons snapped and his shoulder blade cracked. The grizzly shook him like a rag doll before releasing him and striking again with its claws, opening deep gashes across his back and neck. Carl managed one final desperate attempt to crawl away, but the bear wasn't finished. It grabbed him by the leg and dragged him backward toward the den site, treating him like any other threat to its winter survival. The final attack crushed Carl's skull and severed his spinal cord. He died within minutes, his body going limp in the grizzly's jaws. Carl's body wasn't discovered until 3 weeks later, when park rangers conducting a routine patrol noticed his abandoned vehicle at an illegal camping spot. A search team with tracking dogs eventually located his remains, partially consumed and buried under debris the grizzly had constructed. The bear was never located or destroyed. Officials determined it had acted in natural defense of its territory. An investigation revealed Carl's history of wildlife violations and his connection to illegal wildlife trafficking. No charges were filed posthumously, but his death prompted increased patrols in remote areas of the park. Carl's funeral was small and quiet, attended mainly by family members who remembered him as a skilled mechanic who had lost his way. Carl's greed had led him into a grizzly's territory during the most dangerous time of year. For Tyler Brennan, it was youthful bravado and the desire to impress his girlfriend that put him in the path of a protective mother alligator. It was July 4th, 2014, and the Okefenokee swamp was alive with the sounds of summer. Cicadas buzzed in the cypress trees, frogs croaked from hidden pools, and somewhere in the distance, an alligator's deep bellow echoed across the dark water. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of decomposing vegetation, while Spanish moss draped from ancient trees like ghostly curtains. Tyler Brennan and his girlfriend Sarah had driven down from Atlanta to celebrate Independence Day with a camping trip in the swamp's remote backcountry. At 19, Tyler was fresh out of high school, full of confidence and eager to prove his manhood to the girl he'd been dating for 6 months. He was athletic, popular, and used to being the center of attention, the kind of young man who took risks to maintain his reputation. Sarah had initially been skeptical about Tyler's boasts of being able to catch an alligator with his bare hands. She'd seen the reality shows where people wrestled gators, but those were trained professionals with safety equipment and backup teams. Tyler had no such experience, just teenage bravado and a desire to impress her with increasingly dangerous stunts. Their campsite was located on a small island of dry ground surrounded by dark water and thick vegetation. The area was known to locals as a prime alligator habitat, especially during summer when females were protecting their nests. American alligators in the Okefenokee can reach lengths of 12 feet and weigh over 500 pounds. Females become extremely aggressive when protecting their nests, which they build in late spring and guard throughout the summer. An alligator's bite force can exceed 2,000 pounds per square inch, and their death roll, a spinning maneuver used to disorient and drown prey, is one of nature's most effective killing techniques. Tyler's confidence had been building all day. He'd successfully caught several smaller animals, a turtle, a snake, even a small fish with his bare hands. Each success made him bolder, and Sarah's initial skepticism had gradually turned to encouragement as she got caught up in the excitement. The couple had been exploring the water's edge when Tyler spotted what he thought was a large log floating about 20 feet from shore. The dark shape was perfectly still, partially submerged, with just the top visible above the waterline. To Tyler's inexperienced eye, it looked like the perfect opportunity to prove his skills. Tyler waded into the murky water, a makeshift noose held high above his head, his eyes fixed on the floating log. The water was warm and dark, with visibility limited to just a few inches below the surface. What Tyler had mistaken for a log was actually a 12-foot female alligator that had been floating motionless near her nest site. Tyler was within 10 feet of the alligator when she exploded from the water. The massive reptile launched herself upward with incredible force, her jaws opening wide to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. Tyler had just enough time to register his mistake before 500 pounds of prehistoric fury slammed into his torso. The alligator's jaws clamped down on Tyler's midsection with crushing force, her teeth penetrating deep into his abdomen and back. Tyler screamed as ribs cracked and internal organs compressed under the tremendous pressure. The alligator immediately began her death roll, spinning rapidly in the water while maintaining her grip on Tyler's body. As the alligator spun, Tyler's body was twisted and torn, his spine compressed and organs ruptured by the violent motion. The murky water turned red with blood as Tyler was dragged under the surface, his screams cut short by the dark water filling his lungs. The alligator continued her death roll for nearly a minute before releasing Tyler's mangled body and disappearing beneath the surface. An investigation by Georgia wildlife officials ruled Tyler's death an accident caused by reckless behavior in the known dangerous area. No charges were filed, but the incident prompted additional warning signs and increased patrols in popular camping areas. Sarah required counseling to deal with the trauma of witnessing the attack. Tyler's funeral drew hundreds of his high school classmates and teammates, who remembered him as a fun-loving young man whose confidence had ultimately cost him his life. His parents established a scholarship fund in his memory and became advocates for wildlife safety education. Tyler's need to prove himself had led him into a mother alligator's territory during nesting season. For Eduardo Vasquez, it was a lifetime of experience that couldn't overcome the weakness brought on by terminal illness when he faced a jaguar protecting her cubs. It was February 28, 2017, and the Amazon rainforest of Peru was at its most unforgiving. The wet season had turned every trail into a muddy obstacle course, while the canopy above dripped constantly with moisture that never seemed to dry. Insects swarmed in clouds, and the air was thick with humidity that made every breath feel like drowning. Deep in this green hell, where civilization was just a memory, the law of the jungle reigned supreme. Eduardo Vasquez had been walking these trails for over 30 years, guiding wealthy clients on jaguar hunts that commanded premium prices from collectors around the world. At 58, he was one of the most respected trackers in the region, a man whose knowledge of the rainforest was legendary among locals and the international hunting community. But Eduardo was dying, and he knew it. The cancer diagnosis had come 6 months earlier, aggressive, inoperable, and terminal. Doctors in Lima had given him less than a year to live, maybe 6 months if he was lucky. Eduardo had accepted the news with the same stoic calm he'd shown throughout his life, but privately he was devastated. He'd spent his entire adult life in the jungle, and the thought of dying in a hospital bed was unbearable. Eduardo had decided on one final hunt, not for money but for pride. He wanted to prove to himself that he could still take down the jungle's apex predator despite his declining health. It would be a solo hunt without clients or assistants, just him against the most dangerous cat in South America. His family had tried to talk him out of it, but Eduardo's mind was made. The area he'd chosen was deep in the Manu National Park region, where jaguars were known to be particularly large and aggressive. The terrain was treacherous even for someone in perfect health. Steep ravines, hidden rivers, and dense vegetation that could hide a predator until it was too late. For a man weakened by cancer and chemotherapy, it was nearly suicidal. Jaguars are the third largest cats in the world, with males weighing up to 250 pounds and possessing the strongest bite force of any big cat, over 1,500 pounds per square inch. They're solitary hunters capable of crushing turtle shells and caiman skulls with ease. Female jaguars with cubs are especially dangerous, defending their young with ferocious determination against any perceived threat. Eduardo had been tracking a large female for 2 days, following paw prints in the mud and claw marks on trees. His illness had slowed him down more than he'd admitted to himself. He tired easily, his hands shook occasionally, and his reflexes weren't what they once were. But his knowledge of jaguar behavior remained sharp, and he'd successfully cornered the cat near a rocky outcropping where she'd made her den. What Eduardo didn't realize was that the female had recently given birth to 2 cubs. The den he'd discovered wasn't just a resting spot, it was a nursery, and the mother jaguar was prepared to die defending her offspring. As Eduardo approached through the dense undergrowth, the jaguar was already positioning herself between the intruder and her babies. Eduardo spotted the jaguar when he was about 40 feet away, crouched low near the entrance to her den. She was magnificent, nearly 6 feet long with the distinctive rosette patterns that marked her as a prime specimen. Eduardo raised his rifle slowly, taking careful aim at her chest. It should have been an easy shot for someone of his experience. But as Eduardo's finger tightened on the trigger, he hesitated. Something in the jaguar's posture, the way she held her ground instead of fleeing, triggered a moment of uncertainty. In that crucial second of hesitation, the jaguar sensed weakness and attacked. The big cat covered the distance in 3 powerful bounds, her muscles rippling beneath her spotted coat. Eduardo's shot went wide as the jaguar slammed into him, her claws raking across his chest and shoulders. The impact knocked him backward into the undergrowth, his rifle flying from his hands and landing several feet away. The jaguar's jaws clamped down on Eduardo's throat with devastating force. Her canine teeth, designed for crushing bone, penetrated deep into his neck, severing arteries and crushing his windpipe. Eduardo's hands clawed weakly at the cat's head, but his strength was already fading as blood loss and oxygen deprivation took their toll. The jaguar held her grip for nearly a minute, ensuring the threat to her cubs was eliminated. Eduardo's struggles grew weaker until his body went completely limp. Only then did the big cat release him and return to her den, where 2 small cubs waited for their mother's protection. Eduardo's body lay motionless in the jungle undergrowth, his blood soaking into the rich earth that had been his home for so many years. The jaguar had killed him quickly and efficiently, using the same techniques that had made her species one of the most successful predators in the Americas. A search party organized by Eduardo's family found his remains 4 days later, guided by GPS coordinates from his satellite communicator. The jaguar and her cubs were long gone, having abandoned the den site after the confrontation. Wildlife officials made no attempt to track or destroy the animal. She had acted according to natural instinct in defending her young. Eduardo's funeral was attended by hundreds of people from across the Amazon basin. Guides, hunters, researchers, and indigenous leaders who had known and respected him. He was buried in his hometown with full honors, remembered as a man who lived and died according to his own terms. The jaguar he'd sought to kill continued to raise her cubs in the deep jungle, unaware that her defensive actions had ended the career of one of Peru's most legendary hunters. Eduardo's illness had robbed him of the reflexes that might have saved his life. For Marcus Delacroix, it was sibling rivalry and reckless pride that put him in the water with an 18-foot great white shark off the coast of Cape Cod. It was August 19, 2013, and the waters off Cape Cod were alive with activity. Seals basked on the rocky outcroppings while fishing boats dotted the horizon, their crews working the rich waters that had sustained New England families for generations. But beneath the surface, ancient predators patrolled the depths, drawn by the abundance of prey in the warming summer waters. It was peak season for great white sharks, and experienced fishermen knew to be cautious. Marcus Delacroix had been working these waters his entire life, following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather before him. At 29, he was the older of two brothers who ran a small commercial fishing operation out of Provincetown. Marcus had always been the more aggressive and competitive of the two, constantly pushing boundaries and taking risks that made his younger brother Antoine nervous. The Delacroix family had been fishing in the Cape Cod waters for 4 generations, building a reputation for hard work and seamless teamwork. But Marcus had always felt the need to prove himself as the superior fisherman, often taking unnecessary risks to land bigger catches or venture into more dangerous waters. His rivalry with Antoine was mostly good-natured, but it had intensified recently as both brothers struggled to make their fishing operation profitable. Their boat, a 32-foot commercial fishing vessel named Marie Claire after their grandmother, was well equipped for deep water fishing but not designed for hunting large predators. The brothers had been tracking a massive great white shark for several days, drawn by reports from other fishermen about an 18-foot male that had been seen feeding near the seal colonies. Great white sharks are apex predators that can reach lengths of over 20 feet and weigh more than 5,000 pounds. Their bite force exceeds 4,000 pounds per square inch, and their razor-sharp teeth are designed to tear through flesh and bone with devastating efficiency. They're ambush predators that attack from below, using their incredible speed and power to deliver fatal strikes to unsuspecting prey. Marcus had convinced Antoine to anchor near a seal colony where great whites were known to hunt, despite his brother's protests about the danger. The area was notorious among local fishermen as a place where sharks gathered during feeding times, making it extremely hazardous for anyone foolish enough to enter the water. The massive shark had been circling their boat for over an hour, its dorsal fin cutting through the surface as it investigated the unusual presence in its hunting grounds. Marcus became increasingly excited as he watched the predator, seeing an opportunity to prove his superiority over Antoine once and for all. Against all common sense and maritime safety protocols, Marcus decided to enter the water with a harpoon. Antoine argued desperately with his brother, pointing out that their father would never have attempted such a reckless stunt. But Marcus was determined to prove that he was the better fisherman, the braver brother, the one who deserved to lead their family business. He donned his wetsuit and grabbed a heavy harpoon, ignoring Antoine's increasingly frantic protests. The water was clear but deceptively calm as Marcus slipped over the side of the boat. He could see the shark's massive form moving in the depths below, its powerful tail propelling it through the water with effortless grace. Marcus positioned himself near the surface, harpoon ready, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. The great white approached from directly below, using the sun's glare on the surface to mask its approach. Marcus never saw the attack coming. The shark's massive head broke the surface with explosive force, its jaws opening wide to reveal rows of triangular teeth. The first bite caught Marcus across the torso, the shark's teeth slicing through his wetsuit and into the flesh with surgical precision. Marcus screamed as the shark's jaws clamped down on his midsection, crushing ribs and puncturing organs with devastating force. His harpoon struck the shark's head but failed to penetrate deeply enough to cause serious damage. The wounded predator released him momentarily, blood from both hunter and prey mixing in the churning water. Antoine screamed from the boat, frantically trying to start the engine and maneuver closer to his brother, but the great white wasn't finished. The shark's predatory instincts had been fully triggered by the blood in the water and the struggling movements of its prey. It circled once and attacked again, this time with lethal precision. The second attack was devastating. The shark's jaws closed around Marcus's upper body, its teeth severing his arm and crushing his chest cavity. The force of the bite lifted Marcus partially out of the water before the shark pulled him under, beginning the violent shaking motion that great whites use to tear apart large prey. Marcus's body went limp as massive blood loss and trauma overwhelmed his system. The shark continued its attack for several more seconds before releasing what remained and disappearing into the depths. Antoine watched in horror as pieces of his brother's wetsuit and equipment floated to the surface, along with an expanding pool of blood that attracted other scavengers. Coast Guard rescue boats arrived within 30 minutes of Antoine's distress call, but there was nothing left to recover except fragments of Marcus's gear and his life jacket. The great white shark was never located, having returned to the depths to continue its ancient cycle of predation. An investigation by maritime authorities ruled Marcus's death an accident caused by reckless behavior in known shark-infested waters. No charges were filed, but the incident prompted increased safety warnings for fishermen working near seal colonies during shark season. Antoine continued operating the family fishing business alone, but he never again ventured into the waters where his brother had died. Marcus's funeral was attended by hundreds of fishermen and community members who remembered him as a skilled waterman whose competitive nature had ultimately cost him his life. The Delacroix family fishing operation continued under Antoine's leadership, but the rivalry that had driven Marcus to take such a fatal risk died with him in the waters off Cape Cod. Thanks for watching. Just when you think these 5 hunters learned the hardest lesson of all, we're just getting started. Click the next video for the next stories that will show you why the wilderness never forgives and never forgets.